Good morning, class. How is everyone? I'm going to be reading Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs today. Can anyone raise their hand and tell me what they think this book is going to be about? Hopefully someone will raise their hand and tell me what their thoughts are. Maybe there's going to be raining meatballs, or maybe the clouds are full with meatballs. Let's find out. This book is written by Judy Barrett and drawn by Ron Barrett. Maybe they're married, maybe they're brother and sister, who knows? Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. We were all sitting around the big kitchen table. It was Saturday morning, pancake morning. Mom was squeezing oranges for juice. Henry and I were betting on how many pancakes we could each eat, and Grandpa was doing the flipping. Seconds later, something flew through the air, headed toward the kitchen ceiling, and landed right on Henry's head. After we realized that flying object was only a pancake, we all laughed. Even Grandpa laughed. Breakfast continued quite uneventfully. All the other pancakes landed in the pan, and all of them were eaten, even the one on Henry's head. That night, touched off by the pancake incident at breakfast, Grandpa told us that the best tall tale bedtime story he had ever told best tall tale bedtime story he had ever told. Across an ocean, over lots of huge bumpy mountains, across 3 hot deserts and 1 small ocean, there lay a tiny town of Chew and Swallow. So this is the story that Grandpa is telling his 2 grandkids. In most ways, it was very much like any other tiny town. It had a main street lined with stores, houses with trees and gardens around them, a schoolhouse, about 300 people, and some assorted cats and dogs. But there were no food stores in the town of Chew and Swallow. They didn't need any. The sky supplied them all with the food they could possibly want. The only thing that was different about Chew and Swallow was its weather. It came 3 times a day, at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Everything that everyone ate came from the sky. Does anyone know what comes from our sky? What comes from our clouds when it looks cloudy outside? Rain? Snow, maybe? Whatever the weather served, that's what they ate. But it never rained, it never snowed snow, and it never blew just wind. It rained things like soup and juice. It snowed mashed potatoes and green peas, and sometimes the wind blew in storms of hamburgers. That's kind of weird, huh? The people could watch the weather report on television in the morning, and they would even hear a prediction for the next day's food. When the townspeople went outside, they carried their plates, cups, glasses, forks, spoons, knives, and napkins with them. That way, they could always be prepared for any kind of the weather. If there were leftovers, and there usually were, the people took them home and put them in the refrigerator in case they got hungry between meals. So they would watch the weather and see what they were going to have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Isn't that funny? They go outside with their forks and knives and just wait for it to rain food, and they eat. The menu varied. By the time they woke up in the morning, breakfast was coming down. After a brief shower of orange juice, low clouds and sunny side up eggs moved in, followed by pieces of toast. Butter and jelly sprinkled down for the toast, and most of the time it rained milk afterwards. For lunch one day, frankfurts, already in their rolls, blew in from the northwest in about 5 miles an hour. There were mustard clouds nearby, then the wind shifted to the east and brought in baked beans. A drizzle of soda finished off for the meal. Does anyone know what a frankfurt is? It's a German hot dog from Frankfurt, Germany. It's just a weenie, a hot dog weenie, just like we eat. Dinner one night consisted of lamb chops, becoming heavy at times with occasional ketchup. Periods of peas and baked potatoes were followed by gradual clearing with a wonderful jello setting in the west. The sanitation department of Chew and Swallow had a rather unusual job for a sanitation department. It had to remove the food that fell in the houses and sidewalks and lawns. The workers cleaned things up after every meal and fed all the dogs and cats when they emptied some of it in the surrounding oceans for the fish and turtles and whales to eat. The rest of the food was put back into the earth so that the soil would be richer for the people's flower gardens. It's pretty smart of them, actually. So the sanitation department had a really hard job. They had to clean up all of that food every day, 3 times a day, because it rained. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Life for the townspeople was delicious until the weather took a turn for the worse. One day, there was nothing but gorgonzola cheese all day long. And the next day, there were Brussels sprouts and peanut butter with mayonnaise. The next day, there were only broccoli, all overcooked. And another day, there was a pea soup fog. No one could see where they were going, and they could barely find the rest of the meal that got stuck in the fog. So the weather isn't looking too bright. It's not giving them the food that they like. The food was getting larger and larger, and so were the portions. The people were getting frightened. Violent storms blew up frequently. Awful things were happening to this town. One Tuesday, there was a hurricane of bread and rolls all day long into the night. There were soft rolls and hard rolls, some with seeds and some without. There was white bread and rye and whole wheat toast. Most of it was larger than they had ever seen bread and rolls before. It was a terrible, terrible day. Everyone had to stay indoors. Roofs were damaged, and the sanitation department was beside itself. The mess took the workers 4 days to clean up. The sea was full of floating rolls. To help out, the people piled up as much bread as they could in their backyards. The birds picked at it a bit, but it just stayed there and got staler and staler. Has anyone ever eaten stale bread? It's really not good because it's hard and not fresh. There was a storm of pancakes one morning and a downpour of maple syrup that nearly flooded the town. A huge pancake covered the school, and no one could get it off because of its weight, so they had to close the school. Could you imagine a huge pancake on our school? I bet some of you would be happy about it. Lunch one day brought 15-inch drifts of cream cheese and jelly sandwiches. Everyone ate themselves sick, and the day ended with a stomachache. There was an awful salt and pepper wind accompanied by an even worse tomato tornado. People were sneezing themselves silly and running to avoid the tomatoes. The town was a mess, and the seeds and pulp were everywhere. What do you think is going to happen to the town? Does anyone know what's going to happen? The sanitation department gave up. The job was too big. Everyone feared for their lives. They couldn't go outside most of the time. Many houses had been badly damaged by the giant meatballs. Stores were boarded up, and there were no more school for the children. So a decision was made to abandon the town of Chew and Swallow. It was a matter of survival. Look at all that food. That is crazy. See the meatballs damaging the houses and buildings? It's crazy. So they had to leave Chew and Swallow. It was just too much for them. The people glued together giant pieces of stale bread sandwich style with peanut butter, took the absolute necessities with them, and set sail on their rafts for a new land. They glued the pieces of bread with peanut butter together and sailed on. After being afloat for a week, they finally reached a small coastal town which welcomed them. The bread had held up surprisingly well enough for them to build temporary houses for themselves out of it. The children began school again, and the adults all tried to find places for themselves in the new land. The biggest change they had to make was getting used to buying food at the supermarket. They found it odd that the food was kept on shelves, packaged in boxes, in cans and bottles. Meat that had to be cooked was kept in their refrigerators. Nothing came down from the sky except rain and snow. The clouds above their heads were not made of fried eggs, and no one ever got hit by a hamburger again. And nobody dared to go back to Chew and Swallow to find out what had happened to it. They were too afraid. Henry and I are awake until the very end of Grandpa's story. I remember his goodnight kisses. The next morning we woke up to see snow falling outside of our window. We ran downstairs for breakfast and ate it a little faster than usual so we could go sledding with Grandpa. Oops, I'm sorry, I forgot to show you the last page. Grandpa is finishing up telling the Chew and Swallow story about the town with falling food. So they ran downstairs to sled with Grandpa. It's funny, but even as we were sliding down the hill, we thought we saw a giant pat of butter on the top, and we could almost smell mashed potatoes. It's the sun they see, but they're just imagining it as butter, and they could smell mashed potatoes. The end. Okay, class, does anybody want to share what they think about Chew and Swallow? Does anyone want food falling from the sky? Hopefully they'll answer, and I think that'll be really fun for the kids to read this book and then explain to me why they think it would be cool for food to fall out of the sky, or maybe they think it's gross, or I think it's just really cool for their imagination. So today, after I read the book, 1 second, I bought meatballs, of course, because cloudy with a chance of meatballs, and just barbecue sauce. And they're super easy, and I made meatballs for the class. Yeah, so that is my read aloud. I hope you enjoyed it.